Yes, we are.
Cool. Welcome.
Right. Let's go here. And that one, and then and that's Sacred Heart.
Oh, it's almost as good as port. Not quite, but it's good.
Okay, everybody. Hello, everybody. Hello, Linda. Sorry, we're a little late. We had date night tonight. We had virtual date night, so we were doing a Zoom call with everybody at date night. And then I had mass at 7 o'clock, and Father had a meeting. So we are now, and then the deacon's going to be here in a second. And
We'll be the Catholic twins tonight.
Exactly. Oh, no, the Catholic triplets. Catholic.
That's
Deacon
good.
Guillermo's got his
There he
Catholic.
is.
So
And
he moves the deacon up a little bit too. Not so far.
that's right. You have moved up in the world.
Exactly. Linda says hello, and then Kermit says hello. Laura says hello.
Oh, nice.
And so we are. I think the readings this weekend for the Disciples on the Road to Emmaus are appropriate for our coronavirus. By the way, tonight.
Father, what flavor?
Tonight's flavor LaCroix is Nicola, and it's like, it tastes like Coke, but it's LaCroix, and it's skinny, so you can pretend that you're skinny. Hey, there you go. Laura says, wonderful, I found Lumberg, your words were much needed. Thank you, thanks, I am glad to help. Cindy says hello, and Deacon Guillermo, anything exciting going on in your life?
Oh gosh.
You're getting closer to ordination?
Yes.
Are you getting nervous?
Not yet. I mean, it happened. It was funny because when I was getting ready to become a deacon, the same thing happened to me. Everybody was asking me, "Are you nervous? Are you nervous?"
Right.
And I wasn't until it really hit me during ordination. Because during the rite, it's really beautiful because all of a sudden you become a deacon and then you're serving the altar. Mm-hmm. So when I was preparing the altar, then I was
freaked out.
I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm a deacon!"
Yeah. The day we were ordained deacons, that night when I was preparing my first homily, I had a total panic attack. I can't get out of this. This is forever. Blah. So the Shlomers say hello. They're here, and Mary Howard she says howdy from Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh wow! I had my sister, my niece used to live out in the Phoenix area, and gosh, what was that town out there? It was outside of Phoenix, about 20 miles. St. Clair Assisi Catholic Church. Can't remember the name of the town. It was really nice, very pretty.
When we can escape, we'll go there. The Joswas are here. Marie Tuttle says hi from my cat's Facebook page. Hello to you and your cat. Cindy says, I just learned about St. Corona today. Yes, her relics are in Germany.
Oh.
And so maybe she's German.
And Deacon is finishing his master's thesis. He's almost done.
How long is your thesis?
Okay, right now.
So explain to people, what's a master's thesis? Why do you have to write it? What's going on?
So basically you have the option when you're finishing your theological degree to write 3 short papers or a long thesis. So the 3 short papers are normally like 10 to 20 pages. But if you decide to do the long thesis, then it's like 60 to 70 pages.
Right.
And it's basically you have to write about something that you enjoy in your theological studies. So I think I mentioned this already, but I'm writing on Familiares Consortio, the family mission to
Just
education.
light, nothing big.
Yeah.
So if you have any family squabbles, you ask the deacon. He can fix anything.
We kind of moved you out of the corner, but you still look tiny compared to us, the mountains here.
It's all right.
So,
we'll shrink.
What are we can lose weight. So what are the main parts of your paper? What are your kind of points you're unpacking?
So the first chapter, and it was really tough because I needed to do a lot of research, but the first chapter is basically proving that there is a current family crisis and education crisis.
Okay.
And then the second chapter is more like a historical view to the Synod of 1980 in preparation for Familiares Consortium. Then the third chapter is basically looking on Familiares Consortium has a whole chapter on the family mission to education, so actually looking at the text. And
so for all the people who are suddenly, their kids are at home, the schools are closed, and they're going nuts, what encouraging words about their educational mission can you give them?
Oh gosh. Well, as I was doing this research, I realized how important the mission of the parents basically is, because at the end of the day, I can say after God and after priests, probably parents are really the main characters in the history of society and in the history of the church. So I know it's a hard job and a hard mission, but it's just like everything. I mean, when you have a big responsibility at hand, you need a lot of help. But at the end of the day, you know, if you're willing to do your best and you're open to God's grace, then you can do an amazing job. And I think most parents are. So,
correct me because I could be wrong on this, but I think if you go to the breviary, I think it's the feast of Saint Joseph. The officer readings is a letter that's something that Paul VI wrote. Now Saint Paul VI, and it's a beautiful meditation on the family life, the Holy Family, of course, of Nazareth.
Right.
You know, we know Joseph was a carpenter. We know through archaeological studies now that, you know, he probably worked on ancient temples or buildings at that time, and Jesus may have as well. He taught Jesus a trade. So, and it's a beautiful meditation for those of you who are parents,
right, about
raising and educating and forming your children in virtue, in a skill. Now today we often send our kids to college, and we have to be, I would say, extremely careful consumers of where we're sending our kids to universities, because they're not getting an education. They may be learning ciencia, they may have knowledge, but they're not being formed to learn virtue, with a few exceptions. Christendom.
They often haven't been exposed to it,
Yeah, except maybe Christendom, Steubenville, TAC, and a handful of other really good colleges. Mostly, they
or
get
everybody in our parish.
Yeah, yes, that's true too. They're getting a good education here, but it's a beautiful letter. It's worth reading.
Let's see here. Deacon, we'll put this on, all the pressure on you. Laura says, my daughter Olivia is going to bed. She's listening and wants to know if it's okay for a girl to choose a boy saint for confirmation.
Totally. Yes.
There you go.
and the other way around. Like, I feel like we tend to identify ourselves with the same sex saints.
Sure.
But I think we have to make an effort to more and more
be friends with everybody.
With everybody, yeah, and especially because I remember when I started reading Saint Therese, it was really hard for me, and I couldn't understand her because she was really feminine. And
Therese of Lisieux?
Lisieux, yeah.
Super saccharine.
Yes, but then after
but then you realize she's a warrior.
So I read the story of the soul, and I couldn't read it, and I stopped reading it, and then maybe like 5 years later, I tried to read it again, and I realized how profound and beautiful it was.
I found it, and I read it years ago. I should reread it myself. Manuscript C.
Yeah.
About the last third is just pure gold.
Yeah.
Pure gold.
All of it. Let's see here. Betsy and Miguel, you did the funeral recently, and the gentleman who passed away, his wife, has family in Fredericksburg.
Okay.
So the one who I owe a favor to.
Yes.
Yes. So Betsy and Miguel are watching. They say hi from Fredericksburg.
Bless them.
So Miguel,
they're a wonderful couple.
So I owe you big time. I'm praying for you.
The other thing too is in Mother Angelica's community, which you were down there, they make the friar, I shouldn't say make them, but the friars take the name of Mary.
They bless the mother, right? Yeah.
Right, and the Trappists had that same thing years ago. All the Trappists used to take Father Mary Lewis Merton. His name was Brother Lewis. Anyway.
Laura says, love that Deacon Guillermo is referencing Familiaris Consortio.
Ooh.
Laura is a little bit biased towards John Paul. You know, she loves everything that John Paul has written. Will you make your thesis available to read for us layfolk, or is it the kind of thing that has to stay in the seminary circles?
I can give you a copy, but it's going to be penance for you. So.
During the quarantine, if you have a hard time sleeping at night, you can read that. Or along with listening to our homilies. Kermit says, my daughter chose Padre Pio as her confirmation saint. Martha Long, who's up in Arlington, she says,
nice.
Thanks for mentioning TAC, Father.
You know, a priest of the diocese said something that really struck me one time, and I never thought of it until he said, we don't choose the saints, they choose us. So we may have a devotion to particular saints, but, you know, I think over the course of our lifetimes, if we get to know the saints, we'll find out why they probably chose us, or what is the attraction to the little flower, or La Madre Teresa d'Avila, or
Right.
Saint Francis or whoever.
No, I think the saints choose us, and they're going to help us. Like Father Miller in this one YouTube video on YouTube, he's giving a sermon at the Carmel in Flemington, New Jersey, for
Nice.
the Feast of Saint Therese. But he says, like in the case of Therese, Little Flower, that he says he thinks she picks those of us who need her the most. So if you're a special basket case, Therese helps you out.
If I can make one plug, there was a book you guys have probably read this called Therese and Maurice.
Yes.
It was written by I think a bishop in New York.
Yeah, the auxiliary bishop in New York. Yeah.
And it was about a guy who became a missionary in Africa, and she prayed for him. He died. He was apparently kind of a dissolute guy, but then became very holy. He died at a very young age, kind of sad, but it's a beautiful story about their writing back and forth, and she promised to pray for him. And some people think he was very, very holy by the time he died. So I don't know if there's ever been anything about his cause for canonization. But especially if you want to become a priest, get the Little Flower praying for you.
Carol Ann says hi from Maryland. Joan Castle, joining and enjoying your Rectory Chats. By the way, Father Bjorn, participate in your masses, eating great homily. Luke's Gospel is one of my favorites. Yeah, Joan, I think that the disciples on the road to Emmaus are probably a good role model for all of us right now, because we're all discouraged and we don't know what's going on. And I just think it's fascinating. I mean, I'm stealing all this from other people, but they knew Jesus. They knew the tomb was reportedly empty. They knew Scripture, but they weren't convinced. And they're going back to their old town, go fishing, go hang out. I think a lot of us right now are kind of like, well, we can't trust anybody. Everything's a mess. But I think just like them, Jesus is working mysteriously.
And I can't remember who said it, which scholar said this, or where I heard it from, but somebody said the story of the road to Emmaus, it's a microcosm of the gospel itself. I think that's true.
Yeah. Let's see here. What else we have here? Say hi here. Mary mentioned Mary Hauer, St. Clair of Assisi Catholic Church in Surprise, Arizona.
That's it. Yeah, Surprise. That's it. Surprise.
Every time
it's
Father
very
brings
pretty
up a
church.
woman, someone does his research and finds
That's
out.
it. It was a very beautiful church, a modern church, but very pretty.
Let's see here. Everybody's joining us. Lori's here. All kinds of people are here. Father Holmes, are you reading anything interesting? Father Holmes and I have this love for books, and he is always taking books from his room and sneaking them into my room because he's trying to shrink his library.
Yeah, I get rid of 10, I buy 5 more. Currently, I'm trying to get through, I'm about almost halfway through about Cardinal Sarah's book and Pope Benedict XVI Emeritus on priesthood and celibacy. I've read, I think, the first half on Benedict's part, which is very, very beautiful. I think Cardinal Sarah, the little bit I've read, he talks a little bit more about celibacy from an experiential point of view, from how he was received when he became a priest, went to these missionary places in Africa. But I haven't gotten quite that far yet. But I think it's very, very good. And then after that, I'm going to try to get to de Montfort. I still yet to read Louis de Montfort, because I want to do the consecration. But I've got several books that I've started, and I need to get more into them.
What's we got going on? The Spinellis say hello. Carolyn says good evening, all. We have our Stations of the Cross up, but we might be taking those down. We've got to figure something else that we can put up for people to drive through. I think we're moving into the next phase of what we can do creatively. We decided, for people who watch the Mass from time to time, that our Sunday Masses will be from our little tiny chapel down, not in the church, because this way the church can be open all day so that people come in for adoration. And because when we had the Masses streaming from the church, which was nice because people could see the church, we had to close the church all that time, so we wouldn't open until like 2 o'clock. But this way, Mass will be from our little TV chapel, and then people can come all day for adoration. If you have any ideas about creative things you want us to do, we can try to do it. We have confessions today. Joan says, when I taught CCD, I wrote a play on this gospel for my students. They enjoyed acting in my short plays.
Wow.
That's great, yeah. Because CCD teachers are probably in heaven going to be up there right next to the Blessed Mother. You read Dante with Beatrice. There's another whole group there that he doesn't mention of CCD teachers who go into the lion's den and who teach the kids. So, but Now, deacon, as you get ready for ordination, you know, people will want to pray for you. Are there specific things that could help pray for you about? I mean, are there things that you're thinking about as you get closer to ordination?
A lot of things. I mean, it's been really a blessing, and I think we talked about it already, but during this coronavirus time, we have had some extra time to spend in front of the Blessed Sacrament.
Guillermo's in front of the Blessed Sacrament all the time.
So it's been glowing like Moses pretty soon.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's been a good opportunity for me to reflect on not only on the ministerial part of the priesthood, which I'm really looking forward to it, especially hearing confessions, but and celebrating the Mass, of course, but also the whole dimension of the priest being the sacrifice with Christ, and it's been a good opportunity for me to be in front of the Blessed Sacrament so much, because all of a sudden when I'm wasting my time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, I think I can be praying for all these people,
right?
And I feel like this is part of preparation for the priesthood too, because
Father, now when you were in the Navy, had you thought about the priesthood before the Navy?
I had. When I was about 12, without going into all the detail, my family, the younger ones, we moved to Florida, and I met a priest there. His picture is in my office, Father Lucy, Frank Lucy. So he was ordained in the 30s. He was a La Salette missionary, so most of his life was in Burma.
Oh, wow.
He could speak fluent Burmese. He had spent over 30 years in Burma. I think he was, I'm not sure if he was in prison during World War II, but he was certainly over there in that period of World War II. So he came to the States in the early 70s. At that point he was getting older. His health was beginning to get run down, I think, a little bit. And he did eventually got melanoma. So, and I didn't find out until later in life he had two brothers who were priests.
Oh, wow.
So with three priests in the same family. He was a little bit older than my parents. He was very kind. He gave very, very long homilies. He would kind of probably ramble. But I always felt, as a kid, he was kind of a man to look up to. So that was kind of really the first thought about being a priest when I was at least 12. And then he died, I think, when I was about 17 or 18. And interestingly enough, when I went into the Navy, I started thinking about it again.
And when were you at Steubenville? Was that before?
I was after the Navy. So I got out of the Navy in 1990. Went to Steubenville from 90 to 94, and then in 96 got into seminary. So at that point, I was pretty certain I wanted to be a priest. It was really more of a question of where. And there were two priests that really kind of helped. One was Jim Gould, but there was another priest who passed about a year or two ago, Bob Levis. Bob was a priest of Erie, PA, taught at Gannon.
How did you meet him?
He was retired from Gannon. He came down to Steubenville to teach class, and he had a sailboat. So I went up on his sailboat, and we went across Lake Erie. So I was talking to him about the priesthood. He said to me, go to Arlington. I said, where's Arlington? He said, Virginia. I'm like, well, I don't know the diocese. He says, it's good diocese for getting vocations. And I looked at Steubenville, and I looked at Pittsburgh, didn't wind up getting accepted. Lo and behold, Father Gould shows up at Steubenville, and I told him the story. And so Gould, you know the way he is, typical.
Yeah. Tally ho!
Yeah, I was like, oh, you want to be a priest? Yes, Father. Here, fill out the paperwork, send it back. It was kind of that simple, like, okay. And then, you go through the psyche vows and everything else. So
everyone has their funny stories about applying under Father Gould.
But no, Gould was very good to me, and I'll always be grateful to him as well. So, I mean, I think for most of us, at some point, you have to identify with the priest as...
Or you're drawn to a priest, or
yes, exactly.
some priest you
there was a bishop whose name shall not be mentioned, who actually did his doctoral dissertation on this, and it was fascinating, and what his dissertation found was in houses where the priest would show up and the family would see that the priest was normal and enjoyed dinner and interacting with parents and so forth, it kind of introduced the kid to see another side of the priest that thus became attractive to them. And so many older men, I'm sure who were priests, were also altar boys. It tended to help encourage vocations.
Yeah. Now I'm the opposite, because I served once in 3rd grade. I screwed up everything. I didn't pay attention to the practice. The Mass I served, went wrong. I was like, I'm never going to serve again.
Well, the funny part too is about Father Lucy. One time I was been serving during Lent. I dropped the charcoal on the carpet, made like a little black spot in the carpet, and he chewed me out. It's like, oh, I better never come back.
But you persevered. All right, so here we go. Carolyn Spinelli, the boys wanted me to tell you that we watched True Grit this evening, based on Father Lundberg mentioning it in a homily. All right.
You're hide full of lead, you son of a
Carolyn, did you watch the
older version
older
or
or
the
the
newer
new
one?
version? I'm kind of curious. Kermit says the road to Emmaus is also like the structure of the Mass. Jesus first teaches them through the Word, explain the Gospel through the Scriptures, and afterwards he reveals himself to them in the breaking of the bread. Very beautiful. Mary says her daughter Catherine, named after Catherine of Siena, chose St. Martin of Tours as her confirmation saint. Lori says, we are watching you on the big TV, but I went and got my computer so I could comment. We'll think about creative drive-through things for you. Thank you. Yeah. Lori, you're always helping Father Mosman down at St. Mary's with all your social media stuff down
Lord,
there.
folks.
Yeah. So
That's wonderful.
whatever you guys are doing down there, it's working, so let us know. Let's see, we don't have anything coming up on YouTube so far. So we know, Father Guillermo, I'm kind of premature.
Soon to be Father Guillermo.
Soon to be Father Guillermo. So you went on a retreat, and you got to know, after the retreat, did you go to spiritual direction with the priest from the retreat?
I mean, we didn't have a priest in the retreat. We had a priest for confessions,
Okay.
but for everything else, it was a consecrated lay person.
And then when the retreat ended, you were praying more. I mean, did you start talking to the priest who heard your confession, or did it take some time before?
It took some time for me because I was looking for a spiritual director for a long time.
Okay.
And I couldn't find one, but I came across, I think I mentioned this already, I came across a priest who was in the diocese. He was from another diocese, but he was doing doctoral studies at CUA,
Okay.
so he was
Oh,
here. And,
was this when you joined the community?
no, this priest was actually a priest in Houston, so I met him. I met him here because he was helping in one of our parishes. I don't remember where. And then in my home parish at St. Leo's, I met Father Stephen McGraw,
Oh, very
and I
gentle.
started talking to him.
Very
too.
gentle, very
Yes.
gentle
Who
soul.
knows how many vocations he's generated.
Yeah.
Carolyn, back and forth bouncing around. Carolyn says about the question about True Grit, she said, it was the Walmart bargain bin. We had both versions, the old and the new, as a 2-disc set for $5. Carolyn, you are the bargain queen. We watched both. We watched and compared both, but we like the Coen Brothers version best. Did you watch them both tonight, or did you watch them over a couple nights? So, Father, are you reading anything interesting right now?
Just other than, like I said, the Benedict and Sarah book, that's about it.
Okay, you're right. Sorry. Let's see here. What else we got going on?
Actually, I would like to make one quick point. I think this goes to what the deacon was speaking about in ordination. There was something that struck me, and I've heard this before, I don't remember where. It's like, as priests, I think we're always geared towards giving, and that's we should be. But we also we have to learn how to receive. And one of the things I've heard people say is, if you want to be a good confessor, be a good penitent. Go to confession often.
Yes.
Receive the grace of the sacrament. Allow Christ's love, mercy, grace to flood you. As you want to be a father, as you want to give your family, your flock, your children, you want to feed them, let Christ also feed you.
Well, I think a lot, like anything, it's like this question of learning. Because, here at Sacred Heart, even now, we have lots of confessions. And, my experience at John Paul was Sister Mary Bridget was like, hey, could you hear some confessions for the kids on First Friday? And that, over time, just germinated into more and more availability for the kids to go to confession, because there was always initial hesitation, for you got a classroom of kids in the chapel and you were in the confessional, somebody had to kind of break the ice and just go to confession. But once the first kid went, like everybody went. And it was just this reality that the impression I got was, we're all good, but we're kind of wounded, and we're in need of God's mercy. We're kind of afraid to go to confession for a lot of understandable reasons. But once people experience God's mercy, they want it again. It's like a little,
I think we do, and it can be hard, it can be embarrassing. I don't know about you, but like with myself at least, for the most part, I'm never shocked by what's confessed. And if they make a good, sincere confession, I will always tell them, I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
And that kind of,
totally.
that kind of like, really, for Father, I just said blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, right.
It's like, I don't care what you confess, as long as you're sincerely sorry and you made a good attempt to confess.
Right. I think a lot of people,
And I think most people are they're trying.
Pope
They're
Benedict
trying.
told this story. He said, like, when he was in America, he said, you can experience St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York from two perspectives. From the outside to the inside. The outside you go by, it's this very historical building.
Right.
It's very impressive. It's kind of imposing. It's maybe even from the outside it might seem cold, or just kind of this big thing. But you go inside and you see the light coming through the stained glass windows, the candles flickering, you smell the incense, you hear the music, you kneel, whatever. And so faith experience from the inside is different from the outside. And I think a lot of people in our culture, the experience of confession is, the church is obsessed with morality or all these rules, or it's about Catholic guilt. And I mean, again, it's really a misunderstanding, because basic question is, there's good guilt and bad guilt. Bad guilt would be like a neurosis, you need counseling, but good guilt is like, my conscience is bothering me because I've done something, but I don't know what to do with it. Do I just carry it around? Do I bury it? Do I just, a lot of counselors will say you just need confession. I mean, counseling is a great tool, but once somebody experienced the joy of being set free, they want that again.
There was a very famous psychiatrist at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota years ago. He's probably passed away. I can't remember his name. But he wrote a famous work called Whatever Happened to Sin. And it was fascinating, because what he did in this book probably 40 years ago or more was he studied the practice of the Sacrament of Reconciliation or Confession predominantly in South American countries, which at that time was mostly Catholic.
Right.
And he found something fascinating. He found where confessions were common or up or used frequently, things like issues with anxiety, depression, and suicide were much, much lower. And where the sacrament wasn't practiced as much, those issues were worse.
So,
Because Freud said somewhere, he said he had many clients who needed psychotherapy, but he said he had many clients who needed confession.
I make the distinction between guilt and shame. So guilt says I did something wrong. And if our conscience works properly, we should know that. But then shame says I am wrong, I'm bad, I'm worthless.
Right.
That's never of God.
Right.
That's not healthy. That's where we might need some additional help or counseling or talking to somebody. But yeah, guilt serves one purpose, to recognize that we have failed, and then we confess it. And the other thing, there was a book written years ago, I believe it was by Henri de Lubac, called The Motherhood of the Church. And the church is our mother. So what do mothers do? They love us. They care for us. They nurture us. They feed us. They protect us. So it's the job of the church to love, nurture, and feed us with the sacraments, with the doctrine of the church, with confessing our sins so that we can get to heaven.
Right.
And what mother isn't going to do everything to get their child set on the path to heaven, starting with baptism and the other sacraments?
Right. Isaac Kasich from Fredericksburg.
Oh, he's a great guy.
He says the confession flow at John Paul these days is pretty constant. Father Cummings, who's the chaplain there, he hears confessions every day at lunchtime for about 90 minutes. Kids can go anytime during their lunch break, and faculty too. He says that at least was pre-plague, but yeah, absolutely. The sisters there, the charism of the Dominicans, the formation there was just like a culture of, if you need mercy, you can get it. Carolyn says that, back to our True Grit discussion, she said, we noticed in the new version, the Coen brothers version of the movie, that when Rooster cuts her skin to suck out the snake bite venom, the cross shape across the bite on Maddie's hand. We love finding things like that in movies. And then Patty says, great, any discussion about Sacred Heart having a high school? No transportation in Northern Virginia's high schools as of yet. Well, Patty, it's a good question. We have had students from Sacred Heart. We had one student who went to John Paul and who worked out a situation with her family where she and her mother would spend the week up near in the Woodbridge area, and she would go to school at JP. And then we have a family who's back and forth. Sacred Heart originally was sort of two parishes. It was Sacred Heart and St. Bridget's, which is now its own parish. And a family out there has strong connections to O'Connell, actually. And then there's a family here at Sacred Heart with strong connections to O'Connell. So we've had a Sacred Heart presence at O'Connell, at John Paul. And then Father Schultz comes out to hear confessions here, and he's the chaplain at Paul VI in Fairfax, but they're moving out to their new campus in Loudon. And so that's going to be about 50 minutes away from Sacred Heart. So there's some relationship there. We've got some people who are interested. It's not a huge number of going out there. And to get back to your first question, yes, there's an ongoing discussion about Sacred Heart and the question of high school. We have a Chelsea Academy, which is in Front Royal, and they have been working with the Office of Catholic Schools and the diocese about being recognized as a Catholic school. They're at the last stage of that process. That has, tentatively approval has been given, but that process has reached the bishop's office now, and so they've been working closely with him. So it's not a diocesan school, but it's God willing, if it works out, it should be an approved Catholic school. And then we've looked into a couple options here in the area about how to explore high school options. The first time I got here 3 years ago, more or less, and right away people were asking, what about high school? So we're looking, at the options there. So Lori was saying, wow, those commutes sound intense. Yeah, well, in one case, one family, you have a family member who actually works at O'Connell and commutes from the Berryville area out to O'Connell. And so the family was connected there. But there's another family has a long history of going there. So those are long drives, Paul VI would probably be the new campus would be closest. But Suzette says hi. So, Father, any?
Well, I think we had talked a little bit about Catholic schools. Just two thoughts off the top of my head. I think one, I would certainly like my own opinion, for whatever that's worth, is I'd love to see a Catholic school out here at some point in the future.
Yeah.
I don't have a crystal ball, I'm not a prophet, I can't see the future. I think you could be the man to do it. That's just my opinion, because you have a very furtive mind and you're amazingly creative and technologically savvy, and you've got some really interesting, powerful ideas, so I'd love to see. I think you could pull it off. Beyond that, I just think that most parents, who want a quality, solid Catholic education in the future, if they want to keep retaining their kids in the faith, it's only going to become more pressing. I think even as Guillermo speaks about in his thesis, that the parents, even the rite of baptism states, are the primary educators. That right is not to be usurped by the state.
Right.
You look at the state of, for example, Maryland, the garbage they're teaching these kids of, sex ed and some getting and all that. It's horrible. It's abusive in some ways, I think. So I think we have to protect them, and also a great books education. There's so much good stuff they could be taught, and I guess my hope is I hope it will happen. I don't know when, but it's certainly going to hope my granny.
Well, all kinds of interesting things are going on here. We have most of our kids who graduate from the academy, obviously go to one of the local high schools in Winchester. Some have gone to Chelsea. We have some families, a good number of families that homeschool. We have some families who homeschool who are in part of the classical cottage school, which is kind of a co-op situation. So, you just look across the spectrum of kids in public school, a private school, Chelsea, classical cottage school, homeschool. You're trying to figure out just creative ways.
Montessori, I guess, too.
There's some Montessori schools nearby. So.
Yeah, thanks be to God that at least today the parents have a lot of options.
Yeah, so. Let's see.
Any thoughts on that, Deacon?
Well, I was just thinking as I was hearing the conversation that I went to public school, so.
As did I, by the way.
Yeah, so.
I did too for part of my.
And I had crazy education too when it comes to sexual education and all that. But at the end of the day, I think back on those days, and I think I was so blessed with good parents and also a good youth group. I think those things really helped me get through public school because
But again, it's interesting because the kids in our parish. We've got great kids, and you see kids from all these different groups. You got kids from the academy and the relationship that they form with the parish and their families. You have kids from public school who are involved with youth group, who are very active in the parish. You've got families in Chelsea, and they're forming those friendships and relationships. You've got homeschool families who are very active. So I mean, you kind of have everything. And I mean, nowadays, kind of and I mean, Bishop Burbidge too, has been very supportive of all these different kind of initiatives. When he was in Raleigh, same thing. They had one kind of, standard diocesan high school. They had an independent Catholic school, and he's very supportive. He has a big homeschooling mass every year. So, and he has the whole tradition of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, many, many great high schools there. So I think nowadays it's kind of like trying to figure out how you serve the families and the parents. You support our good Catholic schools. You realize you want to have a relationship with these other schools too. And so, I mean, it's like, how do you help the kids and how do you help the parents? Because like you say, I mean, on one level, it's the parents, it's great because the data is very encouraging. I mean, the culture's a mess, but the data shows that, parents, if they're trying to stick it out and if they live their faith on some basic level, and if dad is also involved, not just putting everything on mom, there's some kind of prayer life, and it's not rocket science. You don't have to be Mother Teresa in order for the faith to be transmitted. So I think it's good for them to hear all these different exposures or scenarios for how the kids are educated in the faith. Because you never know where God's working. You think, oh, wow, that kid, he has no exposure, or she has no exposure to the faith. But then they go and become a religious or something, So, let's see. Let's see here. So Mary says, Father Lumberg, you've been volunteered for that, for the high school. Thank you. And
he's the man. Father's the man.
I'm with Father Holmes. Make it happen, Father Lumberg. Thanks a lot. Stacy says, I went to a Catholic high school in the late 70s, and there was not a great deal of Catholicism taught there, sadly. But we're glad you're here. Lisa says, Father Holmes, if there's one book you could recommend to every Catholic teen, what would it be? No pressure.
I can tell you what one of my most favorites is He Leadeth Me.
Yeah, Father
Walter
Ciszek. So if people don't know who Father Ciszek is, what's some background on him?
Father Ciszek was from Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. He was born in 1904. His parents came over from Europe. They were Polish. And when he was a kid, he loved sports. He was a good athlete, loved baseball.
Was he from Poland, or his parents were from Poland?
Parents were from Poland. He was born here.
Okay.
But he probably spoke the language. So he was a bit of a ruffian as a kid. He used to get in trouble a lot, apparently. So when he grew up a little bit more, he decided to go off to become a priest, and he was at Orchard Lake, St. Cyril and Methodius, which is still there to this day. Cyril and Methodius trained Polish priests. He was Polish.
Right.
Well, he reads the life of Stanislaus Kotowska, who's a Jesuit in Polish. He becomes enamored of that, so he goes off to New York and meets the Jesuit provincial. And the Jesuit, the first guy he met at the door, the guy said to him, how are your grades, So he goes back home, he gets this idea now he wants to become a Jesuit. His father is totally opposed. So, and I don't know if his mother was passed away at that point, but anyway, he has an argument with his father and basically says, well, either you give me your blessing or I'm going in. It was like, so the father wouldn't give him his blessing. I think he felt very bad about that. So he went off to the Jesuits. Eventually he goes to Rome. He studies at the Russicum,
the Russian college.
Russian college,
Yeah.
and he was ordained a priest in 1937.
Oh, wow.
So in 1939, at the behest of Pius XI, he goes into Poland with the eventual hopes of going into Russia.
Okay.
Of course, World War II starts. His parish in Poland was sandwiched on both sides with the Russians and Germans. He goes into Russia. Eventually, he gets captured. He spends 5 years in Lubyanka, which was I won't say what it was, a bad place.
Yeah.
He was tortured, and at one point, he was nearly a broken man.
Right.
And
because he was very strong, he was hardworking, he was confident. Yeah, he was going to do it. He was
going to do all these things for the glory of God. And it's sort of like David. God said to David, are you going to build a house for me? I will build a dynasty for you. And so he has this moment, and I think it was in Moscow, I'm not sure exactly where he just totally surrenders to God, and he felt an immense sense of peace. So he wound up going over to Siberia and the Ural Mountains. He was all over Russia. And eventually, so in 1963, thereabouts. He gets released, he comes back to the United States. In 1964, he writes a book called With God in Russia, which was more or less his autobiography. And then in 1973, he writes He Leadeth Me. So He Leadeth Me was a more mature book. It was a more of his spiritualizing and thinking about what he had suffered, what he had went through. And he passed in 1984. He was a very, they said he was an extremely humble man. I've talked to a couple of priests that met him. He said he was very quiet, had a kind of a thick European accent, spoke a lot of languages. So they're pushing his cause for canonization now. So I would say read that book. You'll get something out of it. His chapter on the Eucharist is powerful.
Amazing.
Very powerful.
We have someone contacting us from the Philippines right now, so I'm trying to send messages.
That's
We got
impressive.
people from all over the world.
That's impressive.
He says I should smoke a cigar in the rectory, but I don't think I can make it work because the rectory would stink. Let's see, back to more profound things here. Rachel says, I believe that there is value in public schools as well. It's so dependent on the individual child and the family. On one level, right, the parents have to make the best decision for their family and their kids. Oh, there's a lot of factors there. There has to be a balance. You don't want them raised in a bubble, but you want to protect them, but they have to know how to exist in the society in which way they will live. I mean, these are important questions. I think part of the challenge, the decision for every family is, right, I mean, we have amazing families in our parish, and we have great kids who are in public school. I mean, and we're praying for all of them. It's just you're trying to find the culture forms the person. So most of us, right, we are formed in this culture in which we live. So public school is not that unusual. I mean, I went to public school. Did you go to public school?
I did.
Guillermo did too. So on one level, you got these two crazy priests and one very good deacon out of the public schools. And at the same time, too, you want to provide a community where kids can really flourish in an authentic, human, and Catholic environment where they can get all that. So, right.
You make a beautiful point, Father, even if you didn't mention it specifically, that we're all products essentially of public schooling, and please God, all of us will be priests. Deacon certainly will be soon. So God's grace and God's voice can get through any circumstance.
It's hard.
It is hard.
Right,
Absolutely.
yeah,
and
right.
it's probably harder today than it was even when we were in high school.
No, totally.
But if
Poor kids, what they have to deal with.
Absolutely.
The pressures, the cultural breakdown,
but
social
if
media.
they are open to it, God will speak to them.
No, absolutely. And then the diocese does so much outreach, like work camp, all these different programs. Kids go on these things. They do mission trips. They go to Steubenville. They get involved with different things.
Just quickly, when I was in Fredericksburg, I know you know the family, the B-Wrights.
Yes.
Their daughter Claire, who graduated from UVA, she came to me when she was 16, I think, and she said, "Would you be my director?" And I said, "No, you're too young. All you need is," I said, "go to confession, pray, go to mass. You're too young. You don't need a director." Well, now she's entered the Dominican order.
Right, that's right. She's a Nashville Dominican.
Which is a phenomenal group. They are busting at the seams with vocations.
Right.
So, a wonderful example of, someone who went to a public college, kept her faith, very strong faith, outstanding young woman, going to do wonderful things in the church.
And I'm sure you and Father Cummings didn't give her a hard time at all when you were at St. Mary's.
I did. He did. I was the gentle, loving one. I was the good cop. He was the bad cop.
We're trash talking.
I told her, I said, when you're down, come to me. I'll tell you you're wonderful. And when you want to be humbled, you go to Father Cummings. He'll humble you. And it worked out well.
So Suzette, she says, I have an anonymous question. Sorry. It is wonderful that we can connect at daily and Sunday masses. I'm assuming online. My friend is finding that people seem to text back and forth all through Mass. Do you think that people will continue to do that behavior when we all get back into the church? Well, I mean, on some level, right, this whole thing is so surreal, because you sit there and say people are going to get used to, I can go to church at home in my BJs, I can drink coffee, I got my Fluffy, my dog at my feet, Of course, there is something about that's very appealing, it's very comfortable. I certainly, to be realistic, think that these imposed changes and the way it's interrupted everybody's life, combined with a lot of other factors, could easily make it possible or attractive for someone to say, hey, I got used to streaming mass. I got church that way. I don't need to go back. I'm going to park, get in there, get the kids. It's hard, whatever. But I do think people are obviously yearning to receive the Eucharist again. We all want to be able to share that with everyone. Yes, the easy answer is I'm sure some of our hobby habits or choices that we have made during the Corona quarantine will affect us, and we'll have to kind of either unlearn them or think about them. I think, for people, a good number of people seem to be, this is an opportunity for them to hunger for the Eucharist and to be in community with other people and be part of parish life, the things they took for granted. I think there's other people who were kind of on the edge and we weren't necessarily serving very well and who weren't connecting with the church, and I'll put the blame more on us, that they might just say, meh, I got used to watching streaming mass, I need to go back, so there's the danger of that. But I don't know, it's kind of these things, I'm not quite sure. Then there's people also who are very upset because they feel this was kowtowing to the state and that we gave in and, we should push back more. And these questions are kind of ongoing, but I don't know.
Father, I think you always make a nice point when you said the technology is wonderful, it is a gift and we should take advantage of it in every way possible. But the technology is not meant to replace going to Mass.
I guess the question she brings up is, does it replace it in practice, in the sense that you just get used to, I go to church at home.
I would say it's a temporal, let's say it's filling in the gaps.
Yes, ideally it's just a temporary thing,
ideally,
right.
like if you're handicapped, you can't drive anymore, certainly we could understand that.
Yeah.
And I agree, there's a spectrum out there of where a lot of people are at. And I think the best thing we can do, hopefully when they come back, is welcome them back, love them, and try to listen and not judge.
Yeah, and Suzette points out, they text all through Mass, it's very distracting. Well, and Suzette, thanks you, Father, for your comment. When the difficulty is we provide, or lots of parishes and the bishop, everybody provides this service of streaming Mass. People think, oh, Father, they say, Father, I haven't been, watching Mass, or I'm distracted. Look, to be honest with you, the bishop dispensed us from the obligation to assist at Mass or to participate in Sunday Mass at our parish. You are not technically obligated to watch a streaming Mass. We have the obligation to keep the Lord's Day holy,
yes,
and to keep the Sabbath holy. That can be done by reading the readings, praying the Rosary. To be honest with you, you're sitting there with your kids and you're trying to watch this and everybody's distracted and the dog's barking and the kids are playing with their toys and you're like, this is so pointless. On some level, you're right. Shut off the stupid screen and pray a Rosary with your family. Go on a walk around the neighborhood, say the Rosary if you can do that in your neighborhood. That would probably be better. Yes, some people maybe like to hear a homily, but just, assuage people's guilt. There's not this moral obligation to watch Mass. And it's hard enough for you to watch us, to be at Mass in church. And our homilies are long-winded and we're blathering on, whatever. But then you're watching a screen? Come on. At least with the Rectory Chat, people can ask questions.
There was a cliche years ago, I think they used to say this about religious maybe Guillermo would have heard this, we may be dispensed from attending Mass. We're not dispensed from praying and trying to sanctify the day.
Right.
But we used to say years ago, when the seminarians might go home for the summer or whatever at the high school or college,
right,
don't take a vacation from your vocation.
I think it's hard for families because people are very earnest. Okay, we're going to gather in the living room and watch YouTube on our TV and we're going to watch our parish. And then they feel guilty, Father, I am so distracted, I can't get into it. Because we're watching a screen. At the end of the day, you're watching a screen. Mm-hmm. It is not a replacement for trying to enter into the liturgy, where you try to pray, you're physically present, you're engaging the altar, you're seeing all that. So don't feel bad, and then you're at home and you're some people are a little bit more intentional about dressing up for Mass at home, but you're sitting there and you've got your phone and you're watching a device. So I think you're right. People are going to text and or they're switching back and forth. Oh, I'm watching Father Holmes' Mass. I'm watching Father Lemmer's Mass. Or Deacon's preaching, thank God he's great. And so it is hard. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a little bit of trying to get people back and figuring out how to do that safely and all that. So I think some of these habits we may pick up, but I think they'll kind of, we can work on them. Anne Marie says, are there any rectory pets, Father, any rectory pets here?
Not that I know
We discussed that. Father says, "Why don't we get a dog?"
Yeah.
I love dogs. We always had dogs. I think I would kill a dog. You know, have you been in a rectory with pets?
of. Frank Reedy, when he was alive, God rest his soul, he had a black Labrador. Don Greenhall got a dog after I left St. Mary's. Trying to think. No, any other assignments? No, we never had pets. So, I don't know, did you ever have any religious life, kid?
No, we never.
Suzette says that the fathers have the deacon, you're the pet.
That's right.
It's kind of bad.
Poor deacon, he's like, go here, go there, do this, do that.
Right, yeah. We're like, oh, he's only here a couple more weeks. We're going to have to go back to work. Wanda says if we turn. I think you mean like if we return. I mean, I believe we're going to come back, but I don't know what the timing is. Mary says, yep. And then the 4-year-old breaks out drums during the homily. And it reminds you that, in fact, he did behave better at the church than he does now with streaming mass. Yeah, no kidding. The parents are getting out of purgatory. They're trying to say, we're watching church. But then the toys are right there, so you're going to play drums, right? Because who wants to listen to Father Blather when you can play drums? Wanda says, if we turn the screen, it blocks out the texts. Okay. Let's see, we're going over here. Kathy says, would it be possible for the cantor to tell us the name of the hymns they sing? It's a good question. We haven't thought about that. We just moved to the next stage and had music. The last time the hymnals were replaced, we were allowed to take one of the old ones home, which I have. I would like to be able to sing along. We can try to work on that. That's a great suggestion. Lori asks, did you all have any teachings of the church that you struggled with in your youth? Yes, for me. Father, Deacon?
No, you go first. Give me a minute to think
Hot
about
spot for Deacon. If you don't want to go into specifics.
I don't know. I actually never thought about this, but I think in general, no. But it was always a struggle for me, especially going to public school. I was always fired up with the faith, so I always wanted to evangelize the people who did not believe in Christ. So it was
now,
really.
Before you went on the retreat, though, were you super into evangelizing?
Not so much, but
after the retreat.
Yeah, but I was a practicing Catholic at least, and I don't know. I guess my biggest struggle was always to find ways to present the teaching of the church to the people who didn't believe in the church, because the teachings of the church are beautiful, but the way to communicate it sometimes is just you can't find the right way to communicate it.
Well, I mean, I think it's the whole struggle today, because we are rebuilding everything. Because I mean, the teachings make sense with the context. You know, if you believe in God, you believe in Christ, you accept revelation, you've had an encounter with God, then you want to know more. But when you're dealing with somebody who doesn't know God, doesn't know Christ, the faith, you know, so I think on one level it's a lot of stress, but it's good preparation for your vocation.
Mm-hmm. And growing up, and even in seminary, I always loved philosophy. So I always like to have dialogue with people who doesn't really believe in God or things like that. So I guess it was just part of my personality. But I always wish there was like more opportunities to find new ways to present the faith to people, not watering down the doctrine, but I don't know, just finding ways to make a better job.
I think this was a challenge that we saw in the Second Vatican Council, because John the 23rd was not really what I would call a Thomistic philosopher. I'm sure he probably studied it in seminary.
I think he had good formation.
Probably good formation, but what he said was, take the timeless teachings of the church. Don't change the teaching, but just make the language more accessible, so that essence and appearance and all these Thomistic terms. So what people had really, by the time the council came along, they probably didn't really understand what those things meant.
Right.
On the other hand, you've got someone today like a Bishop Robert Barron, who is trying to evangelize the culture now.
Speak the language of the culture.
Speak the language of the culture, and I, with again and others, the Dominicans at the House of Studies are doing some stuff on this too, with various levels, I think, of success now. But there was a story that I remembered years ago, and I guess the one thing I struggled with a little bit, maybe, I always knew abortion was wrong, but I remember being in a 7-Eleven, and I was probably a teenager, I was a stupid teenager, and I was talking to this guy, and I said, oh, well, what would you do if you had a child that was Downs, or, basically, we don't use the term, like, for example, now we say special needs. Years ago we used a different term, which we don't use anymore. But anyway, and I can't remember if it was the father or the mother said to me, you see that child over there? I said, yes. And they said, that's my son. And I was like, and I felt like about this big at that point. I felt like a real moron. And after that, I thought, yeah, he's right. You know, either life is always sacred or not. You can't say one is worth more than another. So that was really a teaching moment for me. Not that I always knew abortion was wrong, but I guess I kind of maybe questioned under certain circumstances. And after that, and of course with a lot of whatever I learned in college really helped too. So, but that was a special moment for me.
Excuse me, sorry. I just got a message that that the president tomorrow is going to be watching Mass online at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York with Cardinal Dolan. And so I was kind of like, oh, excuse me. So Lori, back to your question. I struggled with a lot of it. I went to Catholic school through 3rd grade, and then we left Pennsylvania. We came to Fairfax, Virginia, and I went to public school. And then I was in CCD, and I had gone to parochial schools. I had some nuns. We went to Mass every week. My mom's Catholic at the time. My dad was not, but he went to church with us. So from my perspective, we were very religious. I mean, it was very relative. And then I had a great CCD teacher, and she started, talking about all the church's teachings. And I'm like, I didn't know the church taught that. I didn't know the church taught that. I mean, it wasn't a reflection on my parents, but I mean, even with the Catholic education I had, I was clueless. I didn't know what the church taught. And then when I learned it, I was like, well, that's great. I'm glad that's the official teaching, but I'm a Catholic. I don't necessarily agree with that. And then in my head, I was kind of creating this category of like fundamentalist kind of thing where like, well, those people, I mean, that's the official teaching and those people hold to it, but I'm normal and I'm Catholic and, whatever. Mm-hmm. And, and she planted seeds, and that was middle school, more or less. And I mean, that took 4 or 5 years for me to wrestle, especially with the issue of abortion, because I never thought about it, but then all of a sudden I'm like, she's like, well, we have to defend all life. All life has value. And I was like, so then I'm like, well, okay, I could see that abortion is wrong. But then my first stage was, well, what about rape or incest? And then, I started reading about that, and then I would read cases of people who had been conceived in rape or incest, and then, they're a functioning adult and they're a good person. I'm like, well, I can't take their life away. So then my next logical step was, well, we need more contraceptives, because clearly abortions happen because of, people these are unwanted pregnancies. So my next thought process was, if people use birth control, we wouldn't have these abortions. But then I learned that abortion is just back of birth control, and that the whole logic, people don't often think about this, but that contraception and abortion often go together. So then, it was painful and it was hard, and I had to wrestle with it. But I realized, the church's teaching was consistent and it made sense and it was true. And then that kind of led me back into the faith. And once I was able to sort of surrender on that issue to God, So, I'm very sympathetic to people who struggle with the church's teaching, because I didn't know what the church taught. And then once I learned it, I was like, my reference points came from the culture, from the public school, from my friends. And, I don't attribute that to my parents. It's just that, you work your hardest to raise your children in the faith, but they live in this culture. And you make prudent choices and you do your best, but they're still being affected by the culture. And that was the same for me. Now, that was, 30 years ago. But, so, as a priest, you're like, I know this is true, and I know we need to live by it. I know this is for our good, and God, holds us to live by this. And, I also know that I struggled with it. So it's trying to encourage people. Help that, you don't want to beat them over the head. You also don't want to shirk your duty and not proclaim the truth, even though people don't want to hear it. And then I think it's kind of part of a piece as people see it.
Well, the other thing, and maybe, I don't know if Deacon would like to comment on this too, it's like, oftentimes, I think incorrectly, we can be divided into conservative and liberal camps. So the priests who may be construed as conservative or orthodox,
right?
They're mean, and some sadly are mean. And then then there's Father I want to be popular, who may be more liberal, or who just says, well, you don't really have to obey this, you don't have to really obey that, or form your conscience way. Just follow your conscience.
It's like, or like someone said to me, I think someone sent us a message the other day. on the Rectory Chat that it was like, well, these are like the speed limit. They're
Right.
suggestions, they're
Yeah.
guidelines, but you don't really have to
We
follow
can
them.
be, I think we can be faithful to the church's teaching, or at least hopefully attempt to be, and are, but also listen and be compassionate. You know, you do have to, you know, Ignatius talks about this, I'm not sure if this is in the excerpt, but somewhere he says, you know, you want to enter the door of the person where they're at, but then you want to bring them out your own door, which is the church's teaching, you know.
Yeah,
So it doesn't have to be, well, just follow your conscience, do what you want, these are road signs, or anything. You better do this, you better do that. You know, it's like, here's what the church teaches, here's the law.
and here's why.
And exactly.
Like people who love cooking, or they love sports, or they love their business, or they love music, the things make sense. Like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to redefine soccer and make it basketball. No, that's
Right.
basketball. This is soccer.
Exactly.
The rules make sense. Or I'm going to cook this, you know, ham and call it a turkey. No. You cook turkey that way, ham that way. You know, things that make sense. You go, oh, I get it. But like, you know, we're good, right? But we're fallen, and so, you know, St. Paul says we see through a glass dark. We have weak will, you know, and our intellect is clouded, and so when we hear the truth or what the church teaches, our first reaction can be like, oh, that's just extreme, or it's mean, or it's harsh.
Right.
But we just like, no, this is how we're wired.
And the other thing too, I think is, well, two things. One, right after the council, you had men like Father Charles Curran and others who were, you know, going against the church's teaching, ultimately had to be removed from Catholic youth. But the other thing today, I think, and the deacon could maybe speak to this too, is that with science is finding new things and inventing new ways of coming up against medical ethical problems that, you know, it changes so quickly. You know, the church, which is a mother, as I said earlier, and also 2,000 years ago, wants to move slowly, So
Right.
we don't maybe always necessarily have a quick answer right away. Like, you know, I remember when we were in medical ethics, they talked about reproduction, gift, lots, and tots. And I think the Vatican is...
These are all terms about different types of
Right, reproductive
methodologies
technologies. And
to assist and or replace.
I think there was
the reproductive
one that
process.
might still be quasi-open. I think that was lots. I can't remember. But anyway,
So like when you talk about moral questions, there are things that are clearly true or violations of the moral law. And then there are questions that come up in the context of cultural or scientific development.
right, exactly.
And sometimes it's very clear right away this is a violation of the moral law, or this is in harmony with human dignity, it's okay. And then sometimes you have things that you have equal distribution of moral theologians who seem to think that could be okay.
Right.
No, that's not, depending how they read it. And so and then in that case, you know, we wait for the magisterium to teach. So
For example, like embryo adoption, the Vatican has pretty much closed that door and said,
Right.
no, your intention may be good, but you really can't do that because, first of all,
but a lot of people don't know that, right?
a human embryo, first of all, is a person, is a human being. You can't treat it as an object.
The
Even
bigger problem right now is the fact that you have a third party
that
involved,
too,
right?
yes.
Because for many people, they're going to say, well, obviously, wouldn't that be a good thing to
And
rescue?
this is where science, I think, is ahead of us, and it's hard for us to keep up with science. Maybe you could comment a little bit on the beginning of moral theology.
And I don't know. I mean, going back to what we were talking about previously, I feel like sometimes we also need to, because we know the doctrine of the church and we know
Right.
it's a beautiful doctrine,
Right.
but we have to be able to realize that, you know, in our journey to God, we're not in the same place. So sometimes the way we talk to people about the doctrine of the church matters.
How?
So we have to do it in a
Right.
loving way.
Right.
And we have to do it in a way that, you know, we don't want to come across harsh to people.
Right. You know,
We don't want to water down the faith either.
well, it's
but-
kind of like a coach, you know,
Yeah.
like you look at a coach who's doing sports for youth. You know, that coach could be an Olympic athlete, they could be a former college player or pro player, but they know, okay, here's a kid who has a desire to play, but who may have some natural native talent or a desire, but you can assess they're not there yet. But if you just say, oh my gosh, you don't know what you're doing, you're so bad, the kid's going to get discouraged.
Mhm.
And a lot of people, they want to follow Christ in the church, but then when they hear what the church teaches, they're like, I don't live that way. I can't follow that. It's like, sorry, interrupt you.
Yes, no. I mean, that was basically what I wanted to say. And when it comes to moral theology, I feel the same way because moral theology, sadly, people think that it's all about rules and teachings. It's not. It's basically about life and knowing that you have to live your life like Christ. I mean, at the end of the day, moral life and moral theology,
living the life of Christ.
it's an encounter with Jesus more than anything else.
There is not a separation, or should not be a separation, between, on the one hand, moral theology and spiritual, maybe ascetical, mystical theology. But one other quick point was that, Newman talked about...
Now, for people who are listening and they're not familiar with our education, so moral theology, we are talking about how you live the Ten Commandments and how you apply that to decision making in your life. And then ascetical and mystical theology, we're talking about the life of prayer,
higher forms of contemplation, and how
to grow
the
in prayer
moral
life
life and growing spiritually ultimately leads to salvation.
Right.
The goal of the church is to birth us, to bring us to salvation.
It's not COVID.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, but one other quick point, Newman, and I think Benedict XVI, I believe, said that one of the bigger things that's really been misunderstood today was when Cardinal, now St. John Henry Newman, talked about how conscience is its own kind of form of a magisterium, that we should follow our conscience properly formed. But you hear so many people today say, well,
everything's kind of relative.
Either everything's relative, or they'll find one priest disagrees with another, or, well, my conscience tells me this.
And the church is right, that you have to follow your conscience. However, we're morally obligated to form our conscience.
According to the church's mindset.
Well, and that, right, like, I have to follow the compass, but my compass needs to be calibrated.
Exactly.
If my compass tells me this is north, but it's really south.
Exactly.
Now, if you didn't know that, and you were following this compass that was wrongly oriented, you're not held accountable for the fact that you didn't know that your compass was off.
Perfect.
But we are obligated when we learn this. I can't just make my compass be whatever it is.
Right. If I'm in Washington D.C. and I want to go to Boston, and I'm going to get on this train to go to Boston, and I said, my will is telling me I am going to Boston no matter what.
Yeah.
But I get on the train next to it, and that train's going to Richmond.
I'm going south.
I'm going south. I may want to go north, but I'm going
never
south.
going to get to Boston.
I'm not that way. So, it's the it's the Jane Fonda. How can I be wrong if I'm sincere? Mm-hmm. You can be sincerely wrong.
But people, again, I mean, this is a problem. Like Lori responded by saying, "You all went for the big ones. No left field Marian doctrines or considering being Orthodox." Well, I was never. Were you ever drawn to maybe like the Orthodox churches?
I myself have not. I think their liturgies are beautiful.
Totally beautiful. Their rites go way back, 1,000 years or more.
I think what's sad to me, and I think I might have mentioned this, Father, in one of our other presentations, that here you have the Orthodox who have valid sacraments, valid orders,
and beautiful liturgies, beautiful traditions,
and then you have the Byzantines, and they both say the liturgy of John Chrysostom. So they say the same liturgy, maybe in different languages, and yet they're separated.
So for people who aren't familiar with that, right, you have the two lungs of the church, the east and the west, and you had the church evangelizes the Mediterranean, and Peter goes to Rome, and then for the first 350 years, Christianity is illegal in the empire. Constantine then converts, and Christianity is granted religious liberty. Now the empire, the Roman Empire, is collapsing under the weight of moral confusion, bad compass, all this stuff.
Invasions,
all this stuff, corruption. So as the Roman Empire collapsed, the church stepped up to fill that void. It's kind of like the Red Cross or Catholic schools. She stepped up to help serve. And like Chesterton would point out, like in his book on St. Francis of Assisi, that the great Roman Empire had to go through a purification of conscience. It had to go through a conversion. There were so much beautiful things about Jerusalem and Rome and Athens, but there was a need for conversion to the fullness of our humanity in Christ. So then the church, centered in Rome, has this huge effect of Christianizing and evangelizing. But by the time you get to about the year 1000, Constantine, and his successors had built the new Rome of Constantinople.
Yes.
And so politically you have sort of old Rome and then new Constantinople. And politically it was very tense. And then eventually you have the Crusades, and it's very complicated. But there's this big tension culturally, politically. Then you have the Fourth Crusade, and afterwards a big disaster. And there's a lot of anger and vitriol between Constantine and Rome.
Right, because of the sacking of Constantinople.
Correct. And so then there's a separation. So you have the Orthodox in the East, you have the Latin West, and it's never really been healed. Then you have the churches of the East who are in union with the successor Peter, like the Byzantine, all those other Catholic churches. And then, but then you also have these beautiful, rich traditions of the East that are the Orthodox. They're very ancient and venerable, but they're not fully in communion with Rome. So back to you.
I think both of us remembered Father John Roney, who was an amazingly talented, bright
He's
guy.
at St. Bernadette's, right?
Now the pastor of St. Bernadette's, and just totally committed to ecumenism. And I have to confess, in all honesty, I'm not nearly as committed as he is. But I always admired, because, I mean, he really was committed to it. And we have to think kind of long term, because, you know, the mutual excommunication between Paul VI and Athenagoras was lifted, I think it was 1964.
64, 65, something.
Around that time. So we really...
So after the
several
Fourth
hundred
Crusade,
years.
there's these mutual anathemas, these hurling of epithets between the East and the West, from Rome and Constantinople, and now you have essentially about 900
50
years of separation.
Right, and the last 50 or so, 50 to 60
There's
years
been
of
an
dialogue.
effort
And
to try to heal
and
that.
the same thing with the Protestants. So I think, you know, in, what was it, Unum Sint, John Paul, you know, talked about the role of the papacy and how the papacy could maybe be restructured a little bit, or possibly how could it function or serve to unite all Christians. And, you know, I think the prayer of our Lord in John 17, Father, I pray that they may one as we are one. You know, we have to continue to dialogue and think long term, because these are fellow Christians. They believe in Jesus. They believe in the Trinity. The first 7 ecumenical councils, in theory, they all hold. So we continue to pray. We continue to be open for wisdom, guidance of the Spirit, and pray that all of us in some way can contribute to the healing and unity of the Church.
Let's see here. Let's see. Kelly pointed out, I'm not exactly sure what she's referring to, but she says, Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati, Journey to the Summit by Anna Maria Vasquez and Jennings Dean. I'm not sure if she's answering another question.
I know he was a mountain climber. I don't know much about him.
Love Pier
I think
Giorgio.
was he a Third Order Dominican, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. He may or may
I think
not.
he was, yes. And then Carolyn says, Ted and I watched the Word on Fire Pivotal Players episode about Flannery O'Connor.
Oh,
Now,
it was
did
great.
you watch that?
I did. It was fabulous. Quite good.
She said, I've never read her and I know very little about her. Have any of you, and would you recommend her work? Oh, absolutely.
Yes, I've read Flannery.
Her book on short stories is great. Her letters are great.
Flannery was...
Hillbilly Thomist.
Oh, yes. Flannery was a Catholic who grew up in the South, and at a very young age contracted, I don't know, was it lupus? I don't know what. I think it was a form of lupus. I can't quite remember. And she died at a very, very young age. And her fiction, she was a fabulous writer. Her fiction takes on elements of strong Catholic faith. She eventually went on to get a master's degree from I think University of Iowa somewhere. Anyway, she died when she was only like 39 or 40.
From lupus, whatever?
Something like lupus or something. I can't quite remember. She loved peacocks. Never married. And how do you describe Grace? This is a gross overstatement. It's probably not the best way to describe it.
Sure.
In her novels, it's often grace comes through the absurd or violence or.
She talks about the fact that we are so resistant to change.
Yeah.
And grace is painful. We want to stay the way we are.
And that's true.
Right. Totally.
You know, cheap. You know, good things aren't cheap, and cheap things aren't good. Sometimes, you know, you hear the expression "cheap grace." Well, there's no real such thing as cheap grace. There may be hard grace. There may be sometimes painful graces, and it's only usually in retrospect that we see that. But you can see in a lot of her writings, it's really fascinating. You know how grace comes through the distorted in a distorted moment, and yet it touches and renews souls. I would absolutely recommend Flannery O'Connor. No questions about it.
Yeah, and she is so profound. I mean, there's this funny story of her. She was at some kind of a dinner party, and there were a number of non-Catholics there. And there were some Episcopalians who were referring to the Eucharist as a symbol.
Oh yes.
And she's kind of an introvert, and she's kind of quiet. At one point, she slammed her hand on the table and said, "Well, if it's a symbol, to hell with it," you know.
Yes.
And then there was another story thing about someone she knew of. I don't know, it was a family member of hers or someone she heard about, But there was a gentleman, I think, who was married to a Catholic, and he would go to Mass all the years. And he finally decided to convert, and someone asked, well, why did you convert? And he said, it was great. He said, I went to all these Masses, and the sermons were so bad, and the homilies were so bad. He said there had to be something to it, because why these people kept going back, he didn't understand. And he realized, it was essentially the Eucharist and what the Mass was. So, yeah, so she is great. I mean, she's hard to read because sometimes she's kind of intense. Let's see. Lori says, so we've been talking about this idea earlier, right? That people are watching online masses. It's not a replacement for actually being able to go to Mass. People are at home. We're comfortable. We're texting. We're switching from Mass service to Mass service. There's some dangers that come with that. But then Lori says, we also have had some people who've been away and now have contacted us about returning to the church because it's blown up so much on social media. Right. Yeah, and we've seen that too. We have people who we haven't heard from in some time at the parish who've reconnected, and then these rectory chats. It's been a great way to reach people.
I think all of us, in particular the bishops and the pastors, and parochial vicars to a degree, anyone who has some tech-savvy abilities, Father clearly has tech-savvy abilities. I think the question all of us need to ask from this point going forward is, how can technology serve us in a greater or newer way in the future? I mean, if you think about the internet, it's, 40 years old, give or take, something like that.
Maybe like 30.
I mean, computers and cell phones, a lot of the technology here, we're talking something that's still in its infancy. We've only really probably begun to scratch the surface of a lot of what we're capable of doing with the technology. And a lot of us have said, even Father has said, what we're doing now, 10 years ago, we maybe not have been able to do.
Yeah, no, and it's been such a learning curve because, I've told Father that I used to think, well, 2 or 3 years from now, maybe we can stream our masses. I see parishes that do this, well, that's great, but we don't have the infrastructure for that. We don't have the funding for that. And then, in the course of 2 or 3 weeks from when, March 15th more or less started and we were getting ready for Easter, we were scrambling to figure out what are the platforms we use, how do we do it, how do we pay for it, people were donating. And then it was, getting it in place just for Easter, and then sort of collapsed after Easter. But again, like Lori's saying, we have heard so much from people, that we're reaching in a different way. Because on one level, technology doesn't replace human interaction.
The goal always should be two things, I think. And if I'm wrong, you correct me. I think on the one level, it has to be having a lived, personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Right.
And building on that, I think evangelization.
Yeah.
How we evangelize,
and what tools we use.
how we phrase things directly, face to face, using computers, Zoom chats, Skyping, this and that. I mean, all good. And we can use these technologies.
And how to use them in balance and prudently.
With, in medio virtu stat, in the middle lies virtue. So yes, with balance, and it can advance the cause hopefully of the gospel. I mean, if you think about that great line from Patton, George Patton, who didn't particularly like the Russians. You give me a couple of 100,000 gallons of gas, and I'm going to start a war by myself, and I'll kick it back to Russia. It's like, and I jokingly say to people, what could St. Paul have done if he would have had my little yellow Jeep?
Right. Well, that was like Mother Angelica, when her story, if you haven't read her story or listened to the audiobook, Mother Angelica by Raymond Arroyo is so good. It's very enjoyable to listen on audiobook. But, she had, she made this deal with God. If she lived through her surgery, could walk again. When she had back damage, she was going to go found a monastery in the south and leave Canton, Ohio. Then long story short, she gets down to Alabama, and then initially their apostolate to survive was they made fishing lures. Then they roasted peanuts, and then a middleman threatened them. He was going to bribe them that if they wanted to get distributing these peanuts, they'd have to do a kickback. And Mother, typical fashion, Mother said, "If I'm going to go to hell, it's not over peanuts." And then she started publishing little booklets about the faith, and then got involved in sort of this media apostolate, and then got interviewed in Chicago for a Christian network in a television studio, and she looked around and said, it doesn't take much to reach the masses. And then she said, Lord, I need one of these. And then they were in the car going back to their hotel. And the sister sitting in the back of the car said, the Lord told her, the media belongs to me and I'm giving it to you. And, but her point was how this could be used. I know Deacon is back. You got to answer the question earlier.
There's two things.
Hang on a second, because Catherine said, I tuned in and out of the Rectory Chat tonight, multitasking. Apparently the rapture happened and the deacon was taken. Everything I learned about the rapture, I learned from Left Behind. So the deacon went over and he reposed the Blessed Sacrament and he's back. So back to you. You said two things you were going to say.
Well, there's two people who you've really begun to change my heart on. One is Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer, and the other one's Mother Angelica. And I think when you look at what Mother did, she was feisty, she was fiercely
broken
Catholic.
Family, all this stuff.
Fiercely Catholic and loved the church.
Yeah.
Human with her own flaws, no doubt. But the bishops tried to get a network off the ground that ultimately did not work. And here's this little Franciscan nun from, I think, Canton, Ohio, goes to the south, builds a monastery, and look at her legacy. It's amazing. And because she gave it to God. And she really did, I think, wanted for the glory of God. So I think...
Totally. And I mean, not that the bishops didn't...
Well, I mean, obviously, they did too. I don't mean to disparage them.
Right, no, but it was fascinating because she was such a hoot because, her thought was if she felt inspired, like maybe God wants something, she would try it. And her theory was if God wanted it, he would support it. And if he didn't want it, it would fail. And they'd move on. And, she had this Franciscan detachment that God would provide the means. I mean, the one time, she and Deacon Bill were in some meeting with a bunch of experts, and they said, well, what's your budget? And she said, budgets are the devil's business. She didn't believe in planning. This is not the Catholic position, but for her, it was like, you don't need budgets. You just do it, and God provides. Now, most normal linear thinkers would say, that's insane.
It would drive them crazy.
But, again, it was, different charisms, different ways. But, it was just like the idea, let's do something for God. And let's make ourselves available, let's be generous, be willing to be a little bit, Franciscan, you got to be willing to do something crazy.
A little bit, yeah. You got to be joyful, but you got to step out of character. I mean, I remember years ago saying to a Franciscan priest that I used to see for spiritual direction. It was kind of funny. He's a great guy. He's an OFM, and forgive me. He said, I said to him, Matthew, why are Franciscans a little bit flaky? And his response was, well, not all Franciscans are flaky. I'm not saying they're all, but anyway, it was this question I asked him. He was like, well, look at our founder. He talked to animals, and, so there's part of, I think, that Franciscan charism is, what John Paul says oftentimes, do not be afraid. Their love of poverty, their love of people, their focus on the incarnation challenges them to have this identity with the poor and to step out of character that, that we should all be living God. Francis was a living gospel. We should all be that way. And I think in her own way, Mother Angelica incarnated that, I think, to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you, again, I think our culture has sort of a stereotype of Francis, that he was this beatnik hippie who talked to squirrels or whatever.
Right.
And when you look at him, it's fascinating. There were some really good biographies that came out of him in recent years, last 10 years.
Yes.
And as he was dying, he wasn't talking about, about recycling. He was talking about the care of the altar, the linens at Mass, how this celebration was done. This is not the stereotypical impression we get, and I think part of it was, he didn't, because of his life and his past, he didn't think he should be a priest. And he had great love for priesthood.
He never became a priest, he only became a deacon. The other thing that's interesting is that Francis, at least from what I've been told, didn't kind of walk into Alvernia or Assisi or wherever and say, hey, I'm Francis, I'm taking over, let me show you what I'm going to do.
No.
He went to listen. To listen and to serve. And that's not a bad model for priesthood, to listen and to serve. Deacon, I don't know, you have any thoughts on the matter?
We don't listen much.
No, I totally agree. And I've been experiencing this a little bit now in my deacon service, because I kind of realize that sometimes a priest or a man of God or a person of God does more when he's willing to listen to the person and to actually talk. Because sometimes people come to priests to just to be able to relieve some of the pain that they have. They don't even care about the things that you're gonna tell them. God willing, you're gonna tell them.
They
something
want you to
that
be
is-
a father.
Yes.
They want you to listen and be
Yes.
present.
Mhm.
They don't want you necessarily to fix their problems.
Yep. There you go.
Let's see, we got a bunch of stuff here. So, so Lori also said, did you know, any question about Marian doctrines? Did you have any problem with Marian doctrines?
No, I mean, thanks be to God, I was always.
I mean, I think for me, what was the big change was I was into apparitions, and I was when Our Lady was appearing. That was kind of wild. Like, oh wow, we're supposed to pray more. I got that part. Then I tried in college to do the True Devotion. I couldn't understand it. I tried to read I don't get this at all. I knew it was good, and all these holy people liked it, but I didn't get it. And it wasn't until I got to seminary that I had a good spiritual director who explained the True Devotion. So it wasn't a stumbling block. I mean, I was drawn to some things of that, but.
The only thing I never really struggled with, not so much the Marian doctrines, but like with Mark Mirabali pushing,
Like the fifth dogma.
mediatrix, co-redemptrix, advocate. I guess advocate, co-redemptrix, I think properly understood is fine. Mediatrix of all graces, again, I think these things have to be nuanced, and I thought he was trying to push them pretty heavily. And I thought, well, if John Paul, who's as Marian as it gets, didn't proclaim them, then
Right.
maybe it's just not the right time. I'm not sure still how I feel about all of them. I guess if the church proclaims them, I'm sure I'll accept it.
Kathy points out that Father Muldowney had a dog. That's right. I've heard stories about it.
Interesting.
He had the dog here. Let's see. So Kelly, who made these comments earlier about, hang on, let me find it. She said, Blessed Pierre Giorgio Frassati, Journey to the Summit by Anna Maria Vasquez and Jennings Dean. She said she was responding to the question about books for kids, or the question was asked,
Okay.
good books for children or teens. Lori says, on the Flannery O'Connor subject, just don't start with Wise Blood, okay? Greeley said, Greeley Myers, one of our parishioners, said, St. John Paul II said, every great work, all holiness is born in silence and in recollection. So that's a good thing to tell priests who don't stop talking. Let's see here. Let's go back. Other stuff. Rachel said, that was an awesome summary, Father Lundberg. I don't know what I said, but great. Thank you. Deacon Alberto from St. Mary's.
Oh,
he
nice.
says, Padres and Deacon, in light of the current pandemic, has provided clarity on the conflict between science and moral law. I've read a few articles of medical staff, mainly in Europe, where they have been trained to separate God from science, only to have their mindset change because of holy priests and religious tending to the COVID-19 victims. The doctor's testimony depicts that how their attitude changed by seeing the love of God in action based on the love shown by the tenderness of the priests and religious. Like Mother Teresa had a story like that, Deacon, where there was a Muslim, I think an imam, I don't know, and he was really impacted by all the hatred in the world, in the sense that he saw all the hatred among religions and the hatred among people. And then he went to visit the home for the dying that Mother Teresa was running in Calcutta. And he said when he came in, he was a very bitter, angry person. And then he said he saw the love of God in the hands of the sisters as they took care of the people who were dying, and that changed him. So I think this is great, because our culture says if you believe in science, you can't believe in God. Or if you believe in God, then you're all into superstition. So I think seeing, and I think a lot of people's impression of the church is that priests, we just sit in our rectories and we don't actually care about people. We just have epithets and rules, and we don't care. And so I think seeing these priests who go on the front lines to minister must be really good.
One of the great stories is a Jesuit that they're considering canonizing from World War I, Father William Doyle.
Willie Doyle.
Willie Doyle. I think he's an
Yeah.
Irish Jesuit.
He died in World War I.
Who died caring
Flanders.
for the troops. Yes.
Yes, right.
I'm hearing stories, I'm sure both of you are, about like up in, I think it's Denmark or the Netherlands, where I don't know how big the COVID-19 is, but they're saying to the older people, either deny them treatment or just let them die. And even
Right.
I think it was the lieutenant governor in Texas was saying something like, well, you should allow the old people to just die, because then we'll have more resources to care for the young. It's like, that is a horrible, horrible response.
And that's our culture, this euthanasia culture. No,
My life is worth no more and no less than anyone else's.
Let's see here. Isaac Cassick says, speaking of Hillbilly Thomas, Ashley directed me to share this video link, so they shared a link.
I loved Ashley and I.
So,
Wonderful.
Suzette said, these rectory chats are really good, thank you. John said something, I don't know what he's talking about. Rachel says, yes, these rectory chats are the perfect example of how technology can have a place. And Suzette says, amen. Kermit says, that's a good book about Mother Angelica. Yes, that biography by Raymond is great. Suzette says, Mother didn't water things down. She was a hoot and such a love for the Lord. Absolutely. And it was great too, because she said one time, she said she wasn't afraid so much of going before God and being judged for the things she had done wrong. She was more afraid that, well, on some level, there was another fear that she would go before God and he would say, these were all the things that I wanted to do through you if you would have cooperated. So that's why she was she said, you have to be willing to do the ridiculous so that God can do the miraculous. She was willing to take risks. You know, again, different temperaments, different spiritualities are like, oh, they're risk averse, and it's not bad. They're very prudent and they plan. Right. But then Mother was like willing to say, hey, maybe God wants this. If this is what the Spirit wants me to do, I'll do it. Deacon says, Deacon Alberto, he says, he didn't want to be a priest because he wanted to proclaim the gospel and preach the word of God. I think it's about St. Francis. So, let's see, it's now 10:20. We've been going for...
Can I make one more quick plug for a book? Now, this is unfortunate.
Father Holmes book review service.
There's a book, it's out of print, but it was written by a Trappist named Father M. Raymond, Mary Raymond, OCSO.
Okay.
And it was called The Man Who Got Even with God. It's
a
true story about a man named John Green Hanning, who's a real cowboy, grew up in Tennessee, Kentucky, and it's about John Green Hanning, who eventually becomes a Trappist monk, and he had a horrible temper. You did not want to make this man angry. You made him angry, you would regret it. He burned his father's tobacco, a whole season of tobacco down, and went down to Texas, and eventually came back and he was reconciled. There was one funny point in the story where he's shaving the abbot, and the abbot was teasing him or doing something to make him angry, and he says, you say one more word, I'll cut you from here.
Our recommended reading for
the man who but it's got a great ending. The Man Who Got Even with God by M. Raymond, OCS.
And Lori put a link on it from Amazon.
And you might still be able to find it.
She linked it. It's
a true story. Read it. It's great reading, and it might help. It also might help people with issues with anger.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see here. Kermit says, one thing that Alec Guinness said that, this is a great story, led him to convert to Catholicism. So this is the actor Alec Guinness.
Yes.
Was he was walking back to his hotel after a day of filming a Father Brown movie, still dressed as a priest. He was wearing a cassock. This is in France.
True story.
And then a French boy ran up to him and grabbed he didn't mention this, he grabbed his hand.
Yes, he did.
And rattled off a bunch of stuff in French, said, merci, père, mon père, and ran off. Guinness never said a word, but the boy went away happy after having talked to the fake priest. And so that experience with him made him realize, the fatherhood, again, the love, the grace of the priesthood and the priestly vocation. You get ordained, and Guillermo will see this very soon. You got people way older than you, way more smarter than you, way more important than you, whatever. And they kneel down in the confessional or sit in a confessional, and they spill their guts to you. That's clearly not just psychological manipulation, like, it's Catholic guilt. Well, that only goes so far. But there's something more that brings somebody into, like, the sacrament of penance, and who wants to be unburdened. And they share all this with you because they know, or you experience, that somehow God is at work. They want to be reconciled, and there's this draw to the Father to do this. And so, he experienced that, because I think his idea, again, of the priesthood or the church was, this is an institution, it's a formal religion, it's about guilt, it's outdated, it's a relic of a prior time. And then this little kid who's clearly not, just totally brainwashed, you might say that, totally connects with them. So it was great.
I think, though, it shows the beautiful image of what the priesthood, and with all the tragedy we've had with bad stuff and abuse in the church, that a priest really is to be a father. And a father learns how to sacrifice,
right,
even if necessary, to lay his own life down. One of the things I marvel at, I can remember when I was a kid, you never called a priest Father John or Father Bjorn or Father Stephen or Father Guillermo. It was always, not a priest yet, but you will be. It was always by their last name. There was respect because they were older than me. Well, now I'm middle-aged, But I still have people come who are much older than me to confession, and they call me father, and it's kind of beautiful, it's kind of shocking, and these are people, they come to us because they trust us.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because, you know, early on, like, you get the question, it's still an important question that people should be able to ask, like, why aren't women priests? And you can go into abstract things. Well, Our Lady was the holiest person ever, she should have been a priest, she's not a priest. But, if I had to boil it down to a quick conversation with students in a school, is a priest is a dad.
Yes.
I think a lot of people say, oh, Father Lundberg, he's the pastor, Father Holmes, he's the priest here. He has all this power. He has this authority to make decisions, to execute things in a parish or whatever. And so I think for a lot of people, it's about authority, and granted, I mean, certain parts of these things are not dogmatic. We don't have to hold power in the way that we do. We can delegate to lay people and all that. But at the end of the day, you're a father, you're a dad.
Yes.
And like we don't see religious life all over the place right now, but religious women are moms.
Yes,
They're mothers.
exactly.
And so, like you say, you realize, another priest pointed this out, I just steal this from them. Someone comes into your office, or someone comes to talk to you, or they reach out to you in a confessional, or they need some guidance. And all, good people from, good families, sometimes dysfunctional families, there's all these father wounds, and they need the love of a dad. And that's what we're called to do.
Absolutely.
And
It's crucial today because, as you said, we see so many broken families. And there was a priest I mentioned earlier, I think I did name Father Levis, who actually, Father Levis was a priest by the time he passed away, 68 years.
Wow.
He got Fran DeRosa, Jim Gould, and I think several other guys in this diocese were named because of Bob Levis. But he had a beautiful expression, and you're right, because a family can only have one mom and one dad. And I realize divorce and the brokenness in our culture today, but
it's complicated, right?
It is complicated. We want to recognize the reality of things. We're not trying to throw anyone under the bus and make them feel bad. But he had a beautiful expression. He said, yes, he the way he explained about male priests, he says, the only thing better than being a priest is making a priest, so that you can be the mother of a priest.
Right.
And, the beautiful story about Pius X was the day he became a bishop, Giuseppe Melchior Sarto, he became a bishop, and he was like 48 years old, and he sees his mother, and he says, oh, mother, I've got a ring. You should kiss my ring. And his mother said to him, oh, son, if I didn't have my ring, you wouldn't have yours.
Oh, there was
what a wise Italian mama.
That was like Bishop Ruskowitz told the story one time. He went home, to visit after he'd been consecrated bishop. And he said, Mom, look at my ring. She says, well, you can still take out the garbage.
And think about, too, how, Guillermo is a deacon. He's soon to be ordained a priest.
Baby priest.
He'll be the baby priest. Think about how much pride his parents have.
Yeah.
His mother has loved him, has formed him, has watched him grow, and it'll be her pride and joy, I think. I don't want to speak for his mother or any parents, but when he gets ordained, his first blessings will go to his parents.
Right.
In particular, his mother. Isn't that a beautiful thing?
But it's also true, it's like the whole thing, it's a parish.
And a parish is a family.
In a parish, it's a family, it's a community, it's all these things. Again, I think more and more, what always strikes me is that there's a difference between diagnosing a culture and understanding a culture. Because there's one temptation to look at it and say, oh, there's so many problems, and people don't do this, and this is bad. And I guess objectively that's all true. But when it's your hometown, or your parish, or your family, you say, well, yes, objectively these things are not good. We don't want to leave them there. We want to move in the right direction. But you care about these people, and you think Jesus gave his life for these people, and so Catholic communities in a Catholic culture value the importance of the sacraments, all kinds of vocations, the priesthood, all those things, and they promote them. And then, for a lot of reasons in our culture, those weren't valued, and so there's a lot of opposition. So you get like thick skin, like, oh, I got to fight everybody. But parishes and families can promote all these things and do all these good things. So Suzette says, I'm from the generation that didn't call a priest by his first name. It's kind of interesting, Suzette. I agree with you because I've always gone by Father Lundberg as a general rule. Mm-hmm. But you look at somebody like Padre Pio. He didn't go by it. In Italy,
Religious tend to go by their first name, I think.
Religious, but also too in Europe, Don so and so, Father so and so, like Father Pius. or Father Joseph or whatever. That was a term of endearment and affection.
Mm-hmm.
People didn't have a problem with that. In America, I think for a while, the last 40, 50 years, there was sort of this fake distinction, like, well, I shouldn't hide behind my title or this formality. Let's just be me. So I'm going to be Father Bjorn, not Father Lundberg. Okay, fine. And I think for a while there was this big distinction. No, I'm Father Lundberg, and that's the way I was, and that's the way I am. But at the same time, too, I think that there's a number of factors that come into play there. Calling somebody by their Father Guillermo, Father Stephen, Father Bjorn, that doesn't mean that we depart from the church or from the truth. And especially in Europe, it's very much a term of endearment. I mean, like in Europe, did you have a lot of priests that went by their last name?
No, and I think part of the logic is they do that because of the baptismal name, by the name they
Christian
were
name,
baptized.
right.
Mm-hmm.
I heard somewhere too, I don't know where I heard this, something like that, our humanity is sort of, it's the grist for our vocation, if you will.
Yeah.
It's the mortar, it's the beginning of, God's grace and our own formation and call to sanctity, and God works, we believe grace builds on nature. So
totally right.
if we believe that humanity is fallen but redeemed, God, we should be loving, charitable, approachable, but we should also, in our personalities, we should also be ourselves. Father is different from me. We're both different from Guillermo. And that's a good thing. You wouldn't want us
Thank goodness
cloned.
we have Guillermo.
Amen to
Makes
that.
up for a lot of things we don't like. But, no, it's interesting. Okay, good. All right, so now it's 10:30, and
Probably wind things up soon.
Anna points out, Anna Fitzpatrick, our Hispanic coordinator, that I'm Father Bernardo. So like in Spanish, doing Spanish ministry, like, okay, my name is Bjorn Lundberg. And Bjorn in Spanish is like Bejorn, and Lundberg is not very easily pronounced in the sort of Hispanic world. So Bjorn is close to Bernard, so I became Padre Bernardo.
I still love Father Rippey's line. I think he said this to you when you were up at the cathedral. I saw your people in jail. That's another issue.
Right, totally. So let's see here. All right, well, very good. Well, Father, you want to do a closing prayer for us?
One thing just real quick, and again, just broadly speaking about vocations, if you get a chance, look up the Hinnebusch, Hinne,
Your favorite story.
Busch, Hinnebusch family. The Hinnebusch family had like 10 or 11 kids. They were from Pittsburgh, I believe. They had 4 sons who became priests, 3 daughters who became Dominicans, and the others got married. So of the 7 children who became religious, all Dominicans. 7 Dominicans in one family. Think about the parents who gave these kids to the church. What a magnificent gift, because they love each other and were open to life.
But it's kind of like insane too. Like, okay, oh wow, my kids didn't become engineers, or my kids didn't become lawyers. You want your kids to be who your kids are meant to be.
Be holy.
Be
a lawyer, an engineer, a teacher.
Right, exactly.
St. Jose would say.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like fine. That's what struck me in the high school. Like, you're like, oh, what can we do to promote these things? Okay, good. You want to promote vocations. You want to do all this good stuff. But at the end of the day, you want the kid to be who God wants that kid to be.
Right.
They're, I don't want to say like a plant or an animal.
We don't want to pound a round peg in a square hole.
Right. You just want to let them kind of just be themselves. So, sometimes like, oh, my child's going to be a great piano player. Well, why isn't my kid an engineer? Let him be a piano player. It's kind of...
Exactly.
So you want to promote vocations and all that, but at the same time, everybody's got a vocation. Your kid has a calling to holiness.
Absolutely.
And so, you want to do a closing prayer?
In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Gracious God, let us rejoice and give thanks for the beautiful gifts that through baptism you give each of us and call us to holiness in our unique personalities, our vocations, and the ways that we serve our brothers and sisters. Let us unite all these gifts in a beautiful symphony as through an orchestral conduction, that God uses each gift as Pope, as Bishop, as Pastor, Priest, as lay flock, to reach out to the margins, to bring the saving gospel of Jesus Christ to the ends of the earth, to help us and unite us in a love with Him, which we begin on this earth will never end in the next. We pray all in Jesus' name. Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
All right. So tomorrow, we are, we're shifting to all our masses will be back in our little studio chapel so that people can come into the church all day. The church will be open from, early in the morning, 9 a.m. until 10 o'clock at night. So come by Sacred Heart, make a visit, pray, and we will see you soon. We'll come up with our schedule for next week, what we're doing.
So Guillermo, when you get ordained, now you're gonna have to do a live stream chapel